Well, we were a newly married couple, so obviously we had those pressures too. And we had the media who were completely fascinated by everything we did. And it was difficult to share that load because I was the one who was always pitched out front, whether it's my clothes, what I said, what my hair was doing, everything. It was a pretty dull subject, actually, and it's been exhausted over the years. When actually what we wanted to support, it was our work.
27 years after Princess Diana's tragic death, a secret buried in the royal vaults is about to be exposed. Hidden away at Kensington Palace, a forgotten room, untouched since Diana's final days, contains a message that could shake the monarchy to its core.
Well, we don't, in many respects, need to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Not least of all because it is the monarch that is the key to this, and the constitution that underpins the monarchy.
A jewelry box, an inscription, and a trail of cryptic clues lead Princess Anne into a web of betrayal, cover-ups, and dangerous truths. Diana was silenced, but what she uncovered is about to be revealed, and the world will never be the same. The truth Diana died to protect is finally coming to light. Behind a sealed wooden panel, a forgotten room was revealed. Its contents had remained untouched for decades, not disturbed since the final days of Princess Diana's life. For 27 years, the room had remained hidden, preserving a silent, sealed testimony to a life that had been publicly celebrated, but also relentlessly scrutinized. The room contained artifacts that would have made most royal enthusiasts gasp. There were photographs, personal belongings, and even a few handwritten notes, pieces of history frozen in time. When word of the discovery reached Buckingham Palace, there was only one person who could be trusted to handle the situation. Princess Anne, the second eldest child of Queen Elizabeth II, had long distanced herself from the tabloid spectacle that surrounded the royal family. Known for her dedication to duty and her calm discretion, Anne was the perfect candidate to oversee the cataloging of the room's contents. The task was not something she particularly relished, but it was one that she could not turn down. For all her reluctance to engage in royal drama, Anne knew the importance of this particular moment in history. Upon entering the room, Anne was struck by its stillness. The air was thick with the dust of decades, and the shelves seemed to hold the weight of forgotten memories. There were items that spoke of Diana's life: beautiful evening gowns, handwritten notes, framed photographs, and, most hauntingly, the presence of a woman who had become both a symbol of hope and a tragic figure in the public's eyes. Anne's thoughts about her late sister-in-law had always been complicated. She had never fully understood Diana's emotional depth, dismissing her as too sentimental, too eager for attention. However, over the years, Anne had come to respect Diana's fierce devotion to her sons and her commitment to the causes she championed. Among the thousands of items in the room, one object caught Anne's eye. At the back of a shelf, partially concealed under a delicate silk scarf, was an ornate jewelry box. Unlike the other items in the room, it stood out, not just in appearance, but in the way it seemed to hold a sense of secrecy. The box was crafted from dark rosewood, its surface inlaid with delicate pearls and sapphires. It shimmered softly, even under the dust that had settled upon it. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and there was something about the box that felt intimate, personal. This was no ordinary royal trinket. Anne took the box into her hands, noting its unexpected weight. It felt heavier than she had anticipated, as though it held more than just jewelry inside. Turning the box over, she found an inscription etched subtly into the base of the lid. "For those who dare seek truth, DS." The initials were unmistakable. DS could only refer to Diana Spencer, the late Princess of Wales. It was a personal message, written by Diana herself, not her royal title, but her name. The inscription was intimate, defiant, and it left Anne with a cold ripple of unease. The more Anne thought about it, the more she wondered why Diana would leave such a message, and what truth she had been referring to. The inscription seemed to hint at something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface of Diana's life. Anne found herself staring at the box for a long moment, feeling as though she had uncovered a secret that had been waiting for years to be revealed. This wasn't just a forgotten trinket left behind by a beloved royal figure. It was a puzzle, a message from beyond the grave. But why had Diana chosen this moment, so many years after her death, for the message to be found? And why had she concealed it in such a way? What was it that Diana had left behind? And who was meant to find it? The more Anne pondered, the clearer it became. This was no ordinary inheritance, but a carefully placed clue, a breadcrumb in a larger story. Anne couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Clutching the jewelry box, Anne knew this was only the start. What lay inside might hold the key to the truth Diana had been so desperate to reveal. The cryptic message and the box itself were symbols of something far greater. It was clear that Diana had left more than just personal keepsakes behind. She had left a warning. Whoever dared to look beyond the surface would find themselves entangled in a story far darker than anyone could have imagined. The box was placed carefully in Anne's private quarters that evening. As she sat alone in the quiet of her room, the weight of the discovery settled heavily upon her. She inspected the box again, turning it over in her hands, unable to shake the nagging feeling that she was holding something far more significant than a simple royal artifact. The inscription echoed in her mind, "For those who dare seek truth." Anne wasn't one to engage in theatrics or sensationalism, but the words stirred something deep within her. They were a call to action, a summons to uncover something that had been buried for far too long. With steady hands, Anne opened the box, revealing its contents. The pieces inside were beautiful, crafted from rare materials, Burmese rubies, sapphires that seemed to catch the light in the most unusual way, and an emerald pendant set with diamonds. Each piece was stunning, but it wasn't just the beauty of the jewels that caught Anne's attention. Etched into the back of each item were tiny, almost invisible markings, symbols, dates, and initials that seemed to reference something far beyond mere royal inventories. One brooch even had a number that looked like an international bank code. These weren't just sentimental keepsakes. They were breadcrumbs, leading to something much darker and deeper. Anne continued to examine the contents of the box, her mind racing with questions. Why had Diana chosen these particular items? Why the strange markings? What did they mean? As Anne turned the box over and continued her inspection, her thumb brushed a raised section near the bottom. There was a soft click, and the bottom panel shifted slightly. Anne's heart skipped a beat. Carefully, she slid the panel open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a bundle of handwritten letters, tied with a pale blue ribbon, and a collection of glossy photographs. The photos depicted Diana clearly in disguise, meeting with people Anne didn't recognize, in locations that seemed to have nothing to do with the life she had publicly led. These were not the images of a royal princess, but of a woman determined to uncover a truth that had been buried. Princess Anne sat alone in her private quarters, the ornate jewelry box resting in front of her on a soft velvet cloth. She had carefully polished its surface, but her eyes kept returning to the inscription that had sent a chill through her when she first read it. "For those who dare seek truth, DS." The message seemed personal, a call to someone who might understand its gravity. And that person, it seemed, was Anne herself. Diana's initials were unmistakable, but it was the deeper meaning of the message that preoccupied Anne's thoughts. Opening the box for the second time, Anne's heart beat a little faster as she carefully examined the contents. She wasn't sure what she had been expecting, but what she found inside left her stunned. The jewelry was stunning, each piece more exquisite than the last. Earrings made from rare Burmese rubies, a sapphire bracelet that sparkled like starlight, and a pendant so finely crafted that the emerald and diamond seemed to glow from within. Yet, as beautiful as the jewelry was, there was something far more unsettling about it. Anne noticed that each piece had markings etched into the back. These weren't the usual royal inventory records, nor were they the types of inscriptions one might expect on a gift passed down through the generations. The markings on the jewelry were strange. Some looked like numbers, others like dates, and a few seemed to be coordinates. One brooch had an international bank code etched into its back. It seemed out of place, as though these weren't just pieces of sentimental value, but rather pieces to a much larger puzzle. Anne's brow furrowed. What was Diana trying to tell her? What had she uncovered that was so important it needed to be hidden in such a cryptic way? The deeper Anne dug into the box, the more her curiosity intensified. Her fingers ran over the smooth surface of the box, tracing its intricate carvings. Then, by accident, or perhaps by design, her thumb brushed against a small raised section near the bottom. There was a soft click, and the panel at the base shifted slightly. Anne froze, her heart racing. With trembling hands, she slid the panel open. Inside the compartment was a bundle of handwritten letters, tied together with a pale blue ribbon. The scent of lavender lingered in the air as Anne held them up to her nose. She had seen Diana's handwriting before, elegant, flowing, unmistakably hers. But these letters were different. They weren't the love letters or royal correspondence one might expect. These were personal. As Anne carefully untied the ribbon, her eyes were drawn to the letters, their yellowed edges betraying the age of the paper. They had been written years ago, yet they felt as if they had been waiting for Anne to find them, as if they had been waiting for this moment to be revealed. The first letter, written in Diana's unmistakable script, was addressed to Anne. The date in the corner of the envelope sent a chill down her spine. It was dated just 3 days before Diana's death in Paris. The ink was slightly smudged in places, as though it had been written in haste. Anne opened it, her fingers trembling slightly as she read the opening line. "And if you're reading this, then they succeeded in silencing me." The words hit Anne like a punch to the gut. This was no ordinary letter. This was a confession. As Anne continued to read, the words on the page became even more chilling. Diana spoke of a charity gala in 1995, where she had first started to suspect that something was terribly wrong. A respected children's foundation that she had tirelessly championed had failed to deliver the funds it had promised to its overseas programs. When Diana began to quietly press for answers, she was met with evasions and financial misstatements. It wasn't long before the situation escalated, and Diana received threats. She had started to dig deeper, and the deeper she dug, the darker things became. Diana's voice in the letter grew more urgent as she recounted how she had begun to uncover evidence of financial mismanagement on a massive scale. Funds meant for landmine survivors, children's hospitals, and women's shelters had been siphoned off into personal accounts linked to powerful businessmen, and, more disturbingly, to individuals within the royal household itself. Anne's breath caught in her throat as she read these words. She had never imagined that Diana could have uncovered such a web of corruption. It was beyond anything Anne had ever thought possible. Diana's letter revealed a woman who had been far more than just a figurehead of charity work. She had been investigating, recording, and exposing a network of deceit and manipulation that extended far beyond the charitable organizations she had once worked with. She had been in contact with investigative journalists from France and Switzerland, who had already begun to sniff out signs of a larger conspiracy. Diana had even started recording her conversations, storing tapes in undisclosed locations. The letter spoke of whistleblowers who had come to her in secret, offering documents and testimony, but they were terrified for their lives. Diana had been a target. Anne could feel the weight of the words in her hands, the magnitude of the secret that Diana had been carrying. As Anne reached the end of the letter, her eyes landed on a single underlined sentence. "If you find this, Anne, then know I left behind a final insurance policy, everything hidden in a Swiss bank vault." Anne's heart skipped a beat. The meaning of the words was clear. Diana had known what she was up against. She had known she was in danger, and she had taken steps to protect herself. But she had also made sure that if something happened to her, the truth would be exposed. Anne's mind raced as she thought about the small silver key from the hidden compartment of the jewelry box. It was a key to something far bigger than she had realized. Anne closed the letter and sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. She had known Diana was a strong and determined woman, but she had never imagined that her sister-in-law had been carrying out such a covert operation. Diana's efforts to uncover the truth had been driven not by a desire for fame or recognition, but by a fierce determination to protect her sons and expose the corruption that had been hiding in plain sight. Diana had been prepared to risk everything, including her life, to bring the truth to light. Anne's thoughts were interrupted when her eyes returned to the photographs that had been tucked beneath the letters. The images showed Diana clearly in disguise, meeting with individuals Anne did not recognize. The backdrops were unfamiliar too. Darkened cafes, underground parking garages, and private homes. These were not the images of a woman who was part of the royal family. They were the images of someone who was working in the shadows, gathering information that could bring down powerful people. Anne carefully examined each photograph, feeling the weight of the secret that Diana had been carrying. The images weren't just pictures. They were pieces of a larger puzzle, a puzzle that had been left behind for Anne to solve. Beneath the photographs, Anne found a small silver key. Attached to it was a tag marked with the words, Zurich Deposit Box 837L. The key seemed to glow in the dim light of her study, its significance more apparent now than ever before. Anne was no fool. She understood what this key meant. It was the next step in Diana's secret mission, the next clue that would unravel the conspiracy Diana had uncovered. Anne knew that she couldn't stop now. She had to follow this trail, no matter where it led. The key, the letters, the photographs, they were all part of a larger story, one that Diana had tried to tell before her death. And now it was up to Anne to finish it. The realization hit Anne like a cold wave. Diana had not just left behind a message. She had left behind a call to action, a call for someone to finish what she had started, to expose the truth that had been hidden for so long. And now that Anne had found the first pieces of that puzzle, there was no turning back. The truth Diana had been so desperate to reveal was now in her hands, and Anne was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The deeper Anne went, the more she understood. Diana had known exactly what she was up against. She had known she was being watched, that her every move was being monitored, but she had also known that the truth was more powerful than any threat. Anne's mind was made up. She would not allow Diana's death to be in vain. The truth was out there, hidden behind layers of deception and secrecy, and Anne was determined to uncover it. Princess Anne stood before a small Swiss bank, the weight of the key in her hand heavier than it had ever been. The flight from London had been swift. The destination kept a secret, even from her own security detail. Only a select few knew where she was, and even fewer understood why she had made the trip. She had carried the key in her pocket the entire journey, its purpose clear now more than ever before. It was the key to a Swiss deposit box, the same box Diana had hidden away her final evidence in, documents and proof of the conspiracy she had been working to expose. As Anne entered the building, the cold, sterile nature of the bank seemed to match the growing tension inside her. The Swiss had always prided themselves on discretion, and this bank was no exception. The bank clerk, a man of few words, led her through a series of thick security doors and hallways. Each door they passed was more heavily secured than the last, each step bringing Anne closer to what she hoped would be the final answers. She barely noticed the sharp click of locks behind her as they moved through the labyrinth of the building. The deeper they went, the more her heart began to pound. Eventually, they reached a private room, tucked away from the public eye. The bank clerk motioned for Anne to sit while he retrieved the deposit box. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. This was the type of transaction that happened in silence, where the contents inside the box would remain confidential, just as they had been for so many years. The air in the room felt thick with anticipation. and Anne's breath quickened as the clerk placed the box before her. Anne's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the box, its weight a reminder of the responsibility now resting on her shoulders. The key slid easily into the lock, and with a soft click, the box opened. Inside, the first thing Anne saw were stacks of carefully organized documents. They were labeled with numbers, codes, and dates, all meticulously compiled. There were ledgers, receipts, and financial transfers. And though Anne's heart was pounding in her chest, her mind was focused on one thing: the truth Diana had uncovered. As Anne sifted through the papers, her eyes landed on photographs. Photographs of people she didn't recognize. The backdrops were unfamiliar too. These weren't the typical royal photographs of galas or public appearances. These were images of Diana, alone, meeting with individuals in unremarkable places: cafes, dimly lit offices, and underground parking garages. It wasn't the kind of life Diana had ever shared with the public. But these photographs were not for public consumption. They were part of something far deeper, far more dangerous. Anne reached for the next item in the box. It was a series of digital discs, carefully stored in protective cases. Each disc was labeled with a date and a subject, but there was one disc in particular that caught her attention. It was simply labeled, "If I Disappear." Anne's hands were shaking now, but she couldn't stop herself from pressing the disc into the provided player. The screen flickered to life, and there, before her eyes, was Diana. The sight of Diana, no longer a princess, but just a woman who had lived a life full of courage and fear, sent a shiver down Anne's spine. Diana's appearance had changed since her death, but her eyes still held that same intensity. There was no mistaking her voice either. It was clear, steady, though tinged with an edge of weariness, as if she had known all along that the end was drawing near. Diana's voice filled the room, speaking directly to whoever would listen. "If you are watching this, then I have been silenced," she began. Her voice was calm, but full of determination. "But I want you to know what I found, and why I could not walk away." Diana went on to recount her investigation into a powerful network of individuals who had used charity organizations as financial fronts. These individuals were not just businessmen or politicians. They were part of a much larger system, a system that had used royal charities to launder money, fund arms deals, and facilitate operations across borders. Anne's heart was pounding in her chest as Diana's words unfolded. Diana spoke of late-night meetings with investigative journalists who had been gathering information on the network. Diana's fear for her safety was evident as she recounted how she had started to suspect her car's brakes had been tampered with, how she had been followed, how she could no longer trust her own security detail. "I must leave them something more than fairy tales," Diana whispered, her voice softening for a moment as she spoke of her children, William and Harry. "They need the truth." Anne sat frozen in her chair, staring at the screen. The weight of Diana's words pressed down on her like a physical force. Diana had known the risks, had understood that she was being watched, and had taken every possible step to protect herself and her children from the dangers lurking within the very system she had once been a part of. Anne had never fully understood Diana's actions, but now she realized that every choice Diana had made had been with a single goal in mind: the protection of her children and the exposure of the truth. As the video continued, Diana spoke of the surveillance she had faced, the whispers she had heard in dark corners, and the people who had tried to shut her down. She had been one woman against a global conspiracy, but she had been determined to fight, to expose the darkness that had grown behind the scenes. Diana had known that her life was in danger, but she had never stopped. She had kept fighting, and in doing so, she had gathered evidence, documents, and testimonies that could bring down the very people who had silenced her. The video ended abruptly, leaving Anne in stunned silence. The truth Diana had been trying to expose was clearer than ever. But now Anne was left with a difficult choice. She had been thrust into a world of secrets and danger, a world she had never asked to be part of. Yet, she could not ignore what she had seen. She could not pretend that the evidence Diana had left behind was not significant. Anne turned toward the bank clerk, who had been waiting outside the room. His face was unreadable, but his words sent a chill down her spine. "You're not the first to ask about this box," he said quietly. "Someone else came by 2 weeks ago. They claimed to be family." Anne's stomach tightened. Who else knew about the contents of the box? Who else was searching for the truth? With the evidence now in her hands, Anne knew the road ahead would be treacherous. There was no going back. She couldn't undo the knowledge she now possessed. But as the weight of the situation sank in, Anne understood that Diana's death had not been an accident. It had been the culmination of a dangerous and well-hidden conspiracy. And someone had gone to great lengths to ensure that the truth never saw the light of day. Princess Anne returned to London, the weight of the evidence she had uncovered still fresh in her mind. The flight back had been quiet, almost surreal. She had spent hours reviewing the contents of the Swiss deposit box, each piece of evidence more disturbing than the last. Diana's suspicions had been correct. There was a network of corruption, deceit, and manipulation, stretching far beyond anything Anne could have imagined. The network involved not only powerful businessmen, but also influential figures within the royal circle and government, all using charity organizations as fronts to launder money, fund illegal activities, and perpetuate a system of secrecy and control. As Anne touched down at Heathrow, the stark reality of what lay ahead began to set in. She had seen the truth, and now she had to decide what to do with it. She couldn't simply walk away. Diana had not walked away, and Anne knew her sister-in-law had left her with a responsibility to finish what she had started. But as Anne made her way through the bustling terminals of the airport, she felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The conspiracy Diana had uncovered was not something that could be easily exposed. It wasn't just a matter of sharing documents or making a public statement. The people involved were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The quiet moments during the flight had given Anne time to think, and she knew that there was only one way forward: to continue Diana's work, to expose the truth, and to protect her family. The documents she had uncovered, along with the recordings Diana had made, held the potential to bring down an entire system. But Anne couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, and she needed to be cautious. The stakes had never been higher, and the danger was real. As she navigated the corridors of the airport, Anne couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her every move seemed to be under scrutiny. Once she returned home, Anne went straight to the residence where she had secured the evidence. The house was located in a quiet area, far from any royal properties, and it had been carefully chosen for its security. Anne had trusted no one with the knowledge of where she had hidden the documents, and she had taken every precaution to ensure the evidence would remain safe. But as she stepped into the study, her sense of unease grew. She had been home for barely an hour when she noticed something strange. Her personal phone, one she used only for family matters, had started to emit strange sounds during calls. There was a faint clicking, as if someone was listening in. At first, she dismissed it as a coincidence, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Anne didn't wait long before calling in a trusted ally, a retired British intelligence officer who had once worked with her late sister-in-law. He had been loyal to Diana, and he had always been there when needed. Anne briefed him on the situation, and together, they began to sweep her home for any signs of surveillance. It didn't take long for the retired officer to find what they were looking for: traces of tracking malware on her phone, hidden microphones in her study, and small, nearly imperceptible signs that someone had been monitoring her every move. The revelation was sobering. The network Diana had uncovered was far-reaching, and those behind it were not about to let the truth slip through their fingers. Someone had been tracking Anne, waiting for her to make a move. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She had known the risks when she took on this mission, but now the dangers felt all too real. She couldn't afford to be careless. She had to be smarter, more careful. Diana had lived in fear for years, and now Anne found herself in the same position. The difference was Diana had fought back, and now Anne had to do the same. As the days passed, the surveillance on Anne's life became more apparent. Letters began arriving, opened or resealed. Her car, always well-maintained, started to experience strange mechanical issues. The final straw came when Anne's security team discovered that her car's brake line had been deliberately tampered with. At first, the damage had been dismissed as a simple mechanical failure. But when the technicians found evidence of sabotage, it became clear that someone was sending a message. Anne had been targeted, and the people behind this were sending a clear warning. But Anne wasn't one to back down in the face of danger. She knew she had to act quickly before the conspiracy could completely silence her. One night, as she sat alone in her study, she received a mysterious package. There was no return address, and the envelope was plain, almost nondescript. Inside, she found a single name, Timothy Radcliffe, Diana's former private secretary. Anne had heard little of Timothy since Diana's death, and she wondered why he would contact her now. Timothy had been one of Diana's most trusted confidants, and his sudden reappearance felt like a sign. Anne tracked him down to a modest home outside of Bath, and they arranged to meet under the cover of darkness. When they finally met, Timothy's face was lined with years of silence and regret. He had been one of the few who had known the extent of the conspiracy Diana had uncovered, and now, it seemed, he was ready to speak. Timothy wasted no time in revealing what he knew. He told Anne that the official investigation into Diana's death had been riddled with holes from the beginning. Evidence had been ignored, witnesses had been silenced, and critical CCTV footage had gone missing. The white Fiat, which had been seen leaving the scene of the crash in Paris, had been dismissed by investigators. The entire case had been quietly closed, and Anne realized that the authorities had never truly intended to solve it. Diana had been silenced, and the truth had been buried. But now, with Anne carrying the evidence, the truth was on the verge of being exposed. Timothy's words were a wake-up call for Anne. She had always known that Diana's death had been surrounded by mystery, but now she understood the full extent of the cover-up. It wasn't just Diana who had been targeted. The entire royal family had been manipulated and controlled by a network of individuals who had no regard for the truth. They had used their positions of power to keep their secrets hidden, and they would stop at nothing to ensure that the truth never came to light. As Anne left Timothy's home, the weight of the situation pressed down on her. She knew she was no longer just a witness to the conspiracy. She had become part of it, whether she liked it or not. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous her situation became. But there was no turning back now. Diana had left behind a legacy of truth, and it was up to Anne to carry that legacy forward. The days that followed were a blur of planning, strategizing, and gathering more evidence. Anne worked with trusted allies, including Timothy, to piece together the fragments of Diana's investigation. They began to track the money trails, follow the connections between the powerful figures involved, and uncover the hidden deals that had been made. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the revelations became. But there was still one final piece of the puzzle that Anne needed to uncover. As Anne sifted through the remaining documents and recordings, she came across a file labeled Operation Marionette. It contained correspondence between foreign security operatives and a private security firm that had been hired to monitor Diana's movements in the months leading up to her death. The final page of the file contained a chilling phrase: "Ensure containment before Paris trip. Risk elevated." Anne's breath caught in her throat as she processed the information. This wasn't just a conspiracy to cover up financial fraud. This was an operation to control Diana's every move, to ensure that she would never reveal the truth. And now, Anne understood. Diana's death had not been an accident. It had been orchestrated. With the evidence in hand, Anne knew that she had to confront the people responsible for Diana's death and the conspiracy that had been hiding in plain sight. She had to bring the truth to light, no matter the cost. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, and the time to act was now. The stakes had never been higher, but Anne was ready. She would not let the people who had silenced Diana do the same to her. The fight for the truth was just beginning.